So I think we have time for just a little bit of discussion and questions. Why don't I invite the presenters, as happened before, to sit up there to field questions, if you don't mind. See people. So I'm just going to play my role of discussant by posing one question or one challenge. Danil Mamyev put it very well when he said, indigenous people all over the world have learned the language of Western civilization in order to make this case for tolerance and for cultural preservation. I wonder if sacred is one of the words of the language of Western civilization, and therefore we should treat it a little bit guardedly. When I did my dissertation fieldwork, did we just lose the microphone? Doesn't matter. Is this one on? Are they all off? Oh. Oh. Testing. Oh, that's kind of a... Hello. Well, I can just shout. I mean... All right. We'll have to make do. We can do this, Occupy Wall Street style if people in the back aren't hearing me. So, when I did my dissertation fieldwork, just very briefly, it was part of it involved a assessment and documenting of local land uses in Zimbabwe and Mozambique so that people could gain rights under national law to live and practice cultural beliefs and so on and practice agriculture in those areas. And so a lot of this centered on what the laws in both countries referred to as cultural patrimony and sacred sites. In the field site in Zimbabwe, which had been very exposed to colonialism and the market and capitalism and so on, people understood exactly what to do, and they referred to sacred sites using a verb, kuyera, which is the same verb that you use in the Shona language, the same verb that you use for totem animals. And so they came up with a lot of pools and forests that kuyera in this way. And it came out very nicely as sites that could be protected, and of course the sites were networked around, so all the land in between got preserved under local tenure. In Mozambique, in the site in Mozambique, which is only 30 kilometers away, where people spoke the same language, they didn't quite get what the sacredness was all about. And they didn't use the verb kuyera to describe the sites that we eventually discovered. They used kuchkisa, which means to be afraid of. And so they'd say, this place scares me because there's some spirit there. But not everybody agreed on the fear, right? One spirit in a particular place scared this person but didn't scare that person. Because sometimes spirits are scary and sometimes they aren't. Depends on how fearful you are, right? So we didn't have any agreement on the Mozambican field site about what was sacred, and it's because they didn't have this distinction between the sacred and the mundane. And the sacred and the mundane is a distinction that arose in Europe in the course of the Enlightenment in the 18th century and so on. And if you're from a different society that didn't have that particular historical experience, maybe you don't distinguish sacred and mundane. Maybe all places are infused with some cosmological importance. Right, so then my question, I suppose, that we'll take some more and then we'll ask the panel to answer. My question is, does, as Mr. Mamyev said, putting a non-Western cosmology into the terms of Western civilization do violence to that cosmology and in some way deform it for the convenience of institutions in a way that we might find troubling? I don't know. So that's my response as the discussant to the two very interesting presentations. Let's take 2 or 3 questions from you all, and then I'll throw it to the panel here. Who would like to jump in? You're going to have to shout a bit. Yes.
Okay, I think that was 2 very, very good presentations that bring attention, at least in my mind, to the issue of land. In the sense that land is something that is given, but it is given for stewardship purposes, not for ownership purposes. So this whole idea of the modern nation state is the creation of ownership of land. So I don't know how to make that transition, that observation that came across very well, especially with reference to coastal communities. If you look at the history of the world, not from the land, but from the ocean, there are no nations. There are only a set of connected communities across the coastal towns that are then connected internally to the aquaculture, is connected then to the agriculture. So perhaps there is some, to a certain extent I'm answering my own earlier question, perhaps there is an infrastructure that goes beyond the nation state, that goes beyond the landed ownership of cultural heritage. And perhaps there is room within the umbrella of UNESCO that can transcend the transnational framework that has tied and to a certain extent not allowed the World Heritage Convention to take care of cultural sites that are transnational.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Another question, please?
So thank you for the very good presentations.
Thank you very much. Very quick comments. Just to comment on your comment. I think I'll agree with you as heritage is concerned, the word heritage. If you look at Weber Noro's thesis on Great Zimbabwe, he says, your heritage, my shrine. So the whole concept of shrine, whether sacred or whatever, has always been there. And I think the Mozambique case could have been maybe out of fear of non-colonization of Catholicism that discouraged the people from really respecting what was their probably sacred place. Now they look at it as something that they now fear. But anyway, moving to the other comment, I think this was really fantastic presentation, two presentations here. And I think that from Ghana, really commendable, the ecological systems approach that you put across. But I have a question. When you talk about the main stakeholders, we have to include all main stakeholders. What about if the stakeholders have got contradictory interests? For example, those people along the coast who want to build hotels, so they see this as a good property, and others who want to protect the area, the king who wants to sell and make money of the shrines. How do you deal with that? Have you had such a problem? And for Danil, listening to you is fantastic. You are a real champion for the indigenous interests and knowledge. And it was a pleasure to listen to you after listening to you in St. Petersburg a few months ago when you talked on behalf of the indigenous peoples. But it makes me feel very bad as an archaeologist when, these people who are basically destroying the sites and not giving the knowledge. And maybe you can benefit from the African experience where communities now are saying, not us without us. You cannot talk on our behalf or pretend to be doing it for us when we are not inside. So you are either with us or you are against us. And I think that probably should be the motto that you should attain. No archaeology should dig for you and give the information and go without giving information without you being part of it.
Okay, let's just take one more maybe before we bring the panel, and then we might have time for another round. I'm not exactly sure. We're on borrowed time here. All right. In that case, please, you've got three comments and questions. You've got one about stakeholders with contradictory interests, and this question of international, transnational cultural areas linked by water, perhaps, and my own concern about the Western bias and the notion of sacred. So, go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I think I'll take the lead and then Danil can continue with that. Yeah, indeed, when we talk of stakeholders, I have a problem with the word stakeholder because not everybody has a stake in a resource. Some may have certain interests. And a person from outside, an exogenous person, cannot have an endogenous interest in a resource there. In my country, currently, there are a lot of conflicts in terms of mountain sacred site,
горных священных,
which has now become a source of quarrying.
потому что это сейчас
And most
как бы надо добывать оттуда что-то, да?
international donors, especially in road infrastructure, are urging for quarrying of such sacred sites.
Но они как бы хотят
Now they are able to influence the indigenous people, especially the local leaders, to sell such sacred site with the view of, if let's say it's a sacred site for a god, then they will relocate the god somewhere and then desecrate that area. I think what the project is doing with this landscape approach is to let all the people understand and come out with what we call the participatory land use plan,
ну, надо всех увлекать.
which is then gazetted within their local administration
Это
system.
все должно быть закрыто.
And once it is gazetted within the local administration system, then all stakeholders, both Indo and Exo, are supposed to respect
И
it.
все вот эти
And therefore,
заинтересованные стороны, которые
it is
живут
sort
в
of
этих
minimizing
местах,
it. But I must say that
уважать
it is
решения
still
и так
a
далее.
strong force which is driving the whole system.
Вещи, которые будут направлять всю систему.
Now, in terms of the
А что касается
Western influence or the Western ideas,
западной идеи, навязывающие коренное общество,
I
потом
think
они
we are rather
ну,
trying
якобы
to
используют,
interpret
на самом деле,
what the indigenous people are doing or the local people are doing
говорит,
by giving certain terminologies to what they are doing.
они, получается,
From
что
our perspective.
западные дают нам
But
смотрят
from
на
their
коренных,
perspective,
их
they
дают,
understand what they are doing.
дают
For example,
определение, что они
we are
делают со
talking of
своей
sustainable
западной точки
development.
зрения. Он говорит, ну коренные-то, когда они делают то или
This
иное,
is
они
a
сами
borrowed
понимают, что они
word.
делают.
But in their culture,
Но в их
they
культуре,
understand sustainability to mean something else.
ну,
but
например,
if you
устойчивое развитие, допустим, у нас нет
Map
такого
it up,
термина в
you will
коренных.
realize that it is equal
у
to
них всё равно
what
есть
we are now terming
какое-то понимание
sustainable
устойчивости, и
development.
они это
For example,
сами
issue of
это
land.
делают. Или проблемы
In
земли.
my culture, land is not supposed to be sold.
В моей культуре нельзя землю
You
продавать.
can only lease
Мы
land.
можем только, может быть, дать
The
в
reason
аренду,
being that the land is for the living,
потому что земля для
for
жизни,
the dead, and for the yet unborn.
для мертвых и для
So
тех,
that
еще пока не
you
рожденных.
cannot
Поэтому
give
ты не
something
можешь, давать что-то,
that belongs to the unborn to an
которое
unknown
еще пока
person.
принадлежит нерожденным.
Now,
Как ты можешь
within
давать
this, if I'm looking or analyzing it from my perspective, I would say that they have an inbuilt sustainable development system.
это? Ну вот, а если бы чуть-чуть западно посмотреть,
And I will
какое это
interpret it
устойчивое
according
развитие,
to how
потому
I
что
have
они заботятся о
learned.
будущем и так далее.
But from
Хотя
their
бы
point
на
of
нашем
view,
языке этого нет.
they have a different perspective. The issue of sacred site,
Проблема священных мест.
some of them have been mystified
Некоторые из них
and they have been put
мистифицированы.
in certain terminologies
Их
which will
записывают
make
в
people
определенном
not even
терминологии.
touch or go closer to it.
Не разрешают людям
For example, most of the sacred
прикоснуться.
sites that we
Большинство из священных мест,
surveyed,
которые мы
women
рассмотрели,
in their
женщины,
menstrual period are not supposed to go
в
there,
менструальном периоде не
with the idea
имеют
that
права
if they
ходить
go
туда.
there, they will never bring forth.
Там
Now, what we realized was that in most of the sites, you have to cross a river.
ну,
And the
потому что
fear
во-
was
во
that
многих
women with their menstrual, this may pollute the water.
культурах,
And therefore,
да,
may
священные
have
места
put
находятся
that
за
myth
речками.
around the whole thing to
Понятие,
prevent
что,
women from
женщина,
going there.
менструирующая, пройдет через реку, она ее загрязнит,
Now, from our
поэтому нельзя.
perspective, they
нашей
are
точки
being
зрения,
gender insensitive in
Ну,
terms
в
of
смысле
the
западной точки зрения,
resource
очень
management.
западно перечислять.
But they understand it
Получается, что
from what they are doing.
полов, да.
So sometimes we need to put ourselves in their perspective to understand certain things before we'll be able to interpret some of the
Коренных, но я не понимаю, с какой точки
practices.
зрения коренных и наоборот. То есть оба процесса.
Yes, indeed, modernization is also creeping in very strongly.
На самом деле,
And,
модернизация происходит очень быстро.
I must say that if we don't change our way of doing things, we may end up wiping the
Может быть,
entire
если мы не изменим, как мы
traditional
подходы,
system that we have,
мы просто
especially
всё исчезнет.
in a country like West Africa where
Такие
the
места, как Запад,
Western
Африка,
influence is
например,
very strong.
где западное влияние
If
очень
we don't
сильное,
put
если
in
мы
certain
сейчас
mechanisms so
не
as to
сможем
protect
внести какие-то
what has been conserved over the
механизмы
years,
сохранения,
this
то
generation of ours will
следующее поколение, да, наше
eventually
поколение, оно
sell everything out
всё
in the name
продаст
of
всё
modernization.
свое место во имя
So again,
модернизации.
we need to look at it from the perspective of the local people and try to enhance what they are doing by building in certain systems and structures that will be able to preserve and conserve what has been handed over generation ago. Daniel?
Ты хочешь это?
Я полностью с этим согласен. У нас тоже есть такое предсказание, что как только мы, алтайцы, начнем продавать землю или делить землю, это будет знак того, что мы пришли к крайней точке.
I agree with what you said totally. Altai people also have the prophecy when.
We don't have microphones.
Okay, I'll try to be as loud as I can with this. So Daniel said that he agrees totally with you, and he said that Altai people also have the prophecy that tells us that when time comes, when Altai people will start selling their land, it will mean the beginning of the end.
Что произошло? В течение многих поколений мы пользовались землей на общих началах. То есть никто никогда не делил.
What happened in our country? So for centuries we were using land as the common heritage.
Но
Nobody was dividing it into the parcels.
как только государственная система началась, после перестроечного года, нас насильно заставили получить доли, земельные доли в каждом человеке и определить себе собственность.
After the perestroika, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, each person was forced to get the parcel of land.
И нас вынуждают на сегодняшний день этими земельными долями войти в экономические, так сказать, рыночные отношения.
So we are forced by our government to using our parcels of land, share of land, to enter the market economy.
Really sorry to interrupt you. I hope we can continue this at next door, just because I got the signal that
Oh,
we're out.
Извиняюсь, поэтому
I hope that
мы надеемся, что мы надеемся.
join us next door at the Zimmerman
Сейчас
Museum.
там
And I
будет
want to say
продолжение.
one other thing, and that is that I want to
прием.
thank the
Я хочу поблагодарить всех
DEF Small Grants Program
эту малую программу, которую спонсировал и фонд Кристенсена, за то, что приехал